Hi, folks. Well, as we wrap up the term, we're getting to some of my favorite topics. And as I've mentioned in previous lectures, the last two topics we're going to be dealing with this term are going to be looking at specifically the application of evolutionary theory and how we can use it to better understand our place on this planet, right? And our place specifically in the animal kingdom and our relationship with other forms of life on Earth, either past or present. And so before we get into the fossil record, I wanted to begin by talking about our living relatives, non-human primates. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. As you can imagine, the field of study which examines the living primates or primatology is not one that is exclusive to anthropology. Indeed, people can and do engage in primatology in other fields of study, of course, biology being one of the most major ones. So anthropology does not own this discipline, but rather have kind of a very special way in which we look at this, right? And this is going to be another topic in which we get to examine how we apply the anthropological perspective. So how can we study the living primates, considering some of those core values that we have, or those core ideologies that we have in mind. So from an anthropological perspective, then, our goals of primatology are shared with that of primatologists with other different kinds of backgrounds and interests. That ultimately what we're attempting to do is to understand ourselves via comparison. And while this is important to us, right, we've already talked about all-term, about cross-cultural comparison. Comparing with the living primates comes with a particular set of challenges. And this is one of them. It's that, at least in my opinion, they're pretty cute. And I love this expression that's very evocative, or this question, I should say, rather, which is when we study the living primates and non-human primates specifically, one of the risks or challenges that we have is the affinity that many of us feel for our living relatives, for the other primates that are present on our planet. And we see a lot of human-like traits that they exhibit in their behaviors. And I love this image here showing you a baby gorilla that's being examined, and that comparable expression it has on its face with that of a human child who is experiencing a similar a medical evaluation. And many of us have experienced that very cold stethoscope on our chests. And so it's a very relatable thing. But it then leads us to this question, right? So when we study the living primates, are we looking through a mirror, or are we looking into a mirror? And what that's kind of meant to evoke, if you recall back when we talked about ethnographic fieldwork, is that anthropology is not an objective science, right? It's not, we don't have a positive approach. Instead, we have a reflexive approach, right? Or an interreflexive approach, or an intersubjective approach, right? Where we understand that our own biases, our own backgrounds as anthropologists shapes the kinds of observations we make. And this becomes really critical when we study non-human primates, because again, we see so many affinities with them that it's been challenged and questioned whether or not we're reading too much into the behavior of our fellow primates, that perhaps because we see them as special and unique and separate and distinct from all of the other kinds of mammals and all of the other kinds of animals, and see them as so much closer to ourselves, that bias frames our interpretation of, as I mentioned, their behavior. So this is where maybe falling back on the anthropological perspective becomes a tool that's really valuable for us, that will allow us to navigate and understand, or at least address those biases that we have when we study the living primates. So again, not something we can necessarily answer, but something I want you to consider as we go through looking at some of these great images, and when we look at some of the casts in our classroom environment this week, right? Again, is how who we are and our connection with the living primates is shaping our understanding and interpretation of them, and specifically their behaviors. Now, before we get into the specific primates, I just wanted to highlight some of the key things that we have been able to show through primatology. And I think something that will come of no surprise to most of you is that the research that's been done of primates, be it great apes, the lesser apes, monkeys, and prosimians, or what we call like the lemurs, lorises, and lemurs, lorises, and tarsiers, there we go, is that primates are intelligent, right? And so how, again, can we, navigate this issue of looking through a window or looking into a mirror? How can we support these interpretations? Well, is the sum of looking at the evidence that's been used to collect it. And so first and foremost, we can look at the impressive set of technical and technological skills that they have relating to tool use. And we can look at some examples of these specific to some of the primates and talk about these in class. And this will become really apparent when we talk about human evolution next week, when we look at the role of culture, and particularly of tool use and of technologies in shaping our own evolutionary trajectory. So this is really critical. Another key thing is our ability to manipulate symbols. And again, one way that this has been supported is through some ape language experiments. There's been other studies that have been done on whether or not primates are able to identify themselves. Those studies kind of have some mixed responses. And of course, the ape language experiments themselves have been critiqued. But again, what we look at, if we look at the sum of all these different kinds of research that have been done, is that most primates seem to have some sort of preliminary understanding of symbols or symbolic behaviors. And so this is again, something that sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom, and particularly animal communication systems. The ability to reason analogically, again, this is not something that is unique to primates, but definitely is seen as a sign of intelligence. And same with the ability to manipulate symbols and tool use, right? So corvids, including crows and magpies and ravens and jays, and there's a whole variety of birds, also have the ability to do these kinds of things. But again, we're looking at kind of the package overall. And just because other animals are also intelligent does not mean that primates don't have to be, right? So again, this is not exclusive to primates, but just a key trait that we have. So we can reason analogically, we can learn and transmit our knowledge across generations. The kind of classic example of this is of Japanese macaques. I have a picture of them coming up, who were being supplemented with food resources from the primatologists who were studying them, sweet potatoes in particular. And one of the macaques didn't like the sand that was getting on their sweet potatoes or their yams, I can't remember which one it is, down at the beach where they were being fed, and went and was washing it off in the ocean, and then was observed later showing her children, her daughter in particular, dragging her down into the water and showing her how to wash her potatoes. And now this whole troop of macaques to this day have continued this behavior. So this has been transmitted not only between parent and offspring, but to other members in the social group, and has been transmitted consistently over time. So I can't remember exactly when this original observation was made, but it's been decades. So again, across several generations. And again, I mentioned this already, that some primates, chimpanzees in particular, have been able to pass, and gorillas as well, have been able to pass the so-called mirror test. So this is a way in which we see if animals identify themselves as individuals versus just another similar being that is either themselves or different than their others, right? And many of you with pets will know that dogs, for example, consistently fail this because they see not themselves in the mirror, but another dog in the mirror, and they'll like bark at themselves and whatnot. So again, it's not that this is exclusive to primates, but other primates or other animals that we consider to be intelligent, beings like dolphins, for example, seem to be also capable of identifying this, and certain birds have been as well. A key thing that we can talk about in class this week, and something that does kind of set us apart, is the various forms of social organization that primates have. And the argument that I'm going to be presenting to you folks in regards to this topic is not only are primates social, that we thrive in social environments, but particularly that the social organization that we have, the various forms that we have as expressed through different kinds of primates, are a key way in which we have adapted and then continue to survive. So this is one of the explanations for why there are so many different kinds of primates, is because of the kind of behavioral plasticity that is present present, and the variety of social organization forms that primates have been able to engage in. So, for example, I apologize for the poor phrasing here, but we do behave differently to differently dominant individuals, so that there is hierarchies that exist within many primate societies, but not all, and that these inform how, again, what the social organization is going to be. This impacts who is mating with each other and which offspring are being produced, again, and therefore what traits are being transmitted. There's individual personalities, and individuals within these social groups are reacting and recognizing and responding to these personalities in different forms, right? And there's different social strategies that are used by primates in order to deal with things like aggression or with grief, or even with joy and food and all these other factors that shape our experiences within these primate groups. We have the ability to recognize our kin from our non-kin. And this is, as you can imagine, really critical in terms of transmission of traits and alleles, preventing genetic inbreeding, right, that can occur. And there's also been shown that not only can we recognize who our kin are, but we tend to ally with our kin, particularly when there is conflict in place. Sorry, computer issues. The last thing we are able to do, or what we're able to know from our comparative studies of primates as a whole, is that when we think about social organization and the important role that it plays in the success of primates, is that there doesn't seem to be a significant relationship between environment and primate social organization. So what do I mean by that? Is that the environment that a primate lives in, it does not seem to determine what form of social organization plays. So there's no direct correlation there, or at least no significant relationship there. Instead, as I've kind of already alluded to, is that primates are all about both dietary and behavioral plasticity. And if you're very much interested in this, we get into it more in our biological anthropology class. The last thing we also know is that monogamous pairs, or monogamy in general, is very rare in primates. That's one of the things that kind of sets humans apart from other primates, is our kind of proclivity in many cultures towards monogamy. But it's very rare in non-human primates, and we're going to look at some of those different forms in this particular topic. But there are some key things that we do see in those primates that practice monogamy, and a lot of it comes down to a lack of significant sexual dimorphism. And so we'll talk more about that, what that means, and I'll show you some fossil, or not some fossil casts, some replicas that demonstrate this. And they also have social organization where sex roles are undifferentiated, right? So particularly this tends to relate to childcare, that both parents play an equal role, or at least undertake similar tasks when it comes to caring for and supporting the offspring, right? Of course, there are some biological restrictions or limitations around that. So for example, when primates are first born and they're heavily dependent on colostrum, or the breast milk of their mother, right? What will happen is that the father, so the other part of the monogamous pair, will supplement basically his partner's food and ensure that she has the nutrition that she needs, or at least will babysit the infant or infants to ensure that she has the ability to go out and hunt or procure the food that she needs in order to produce that milk, right? So there's different ways that primates navigate this process, but it's just important to note that it's not that, it's, food procurement falls exclusively in the hands of one of the sexes, but instead we see variation in this form. And I just want to give a shout out to one of my former professors, Dr. Fettigan, who I took courses with at the University of Alberta, and who is a leading primatologist in the field, who's provided a lot of insight, and a lot of the information that she taught me over the years is what I've used to kind of build in or flesh out this particular topic. Okay, so this is what we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about in class this week, is primate characteristics. And again, what I really want to emphasize and focus on is how the traits that we see as common, as being held as kind of a package representing what it means to be a primate, have specific adaptive features, right, that have allowed primates to successfully adapt to not just a particular environment, but basically all parts of the globe, right? And of course, humans, thanks to our cultural adaptations, have been able to take this onto the next level. But again, our biological adaptations, the anatomical traits that we have greatly facilitated this. So I'm going to show you some different casts that illustrate these different points. So for example, we'll look at how we have the ability to rotate our forearm, right? It allows us to, to show our palms, to do our hands, that accompanied with our grasping hands and feet that have both a power grip and a precision grip, allow us to navigate different environments, and particularly arboreal environments, and we'll talk about that. We have forward-facing eyes that allows for, as you can see in this image here, binocular vision, and many primates have color vision as well. And we'll talk about how that has adaptive advantages in terms of not only navigating both forested and terrestrial environments, but in identifying safe food resources as well. We have different areas of our brain that have changed relative to other mammals in particular. And one of the things that we see in primates is a reduction in olfaction, or the sense of smell, and a greater reliance on vision. And so we see the appropriate lobes of the brain also that are associated with sight being enlarged, and those associated with sense of smell being reduced. And so again, it's those primary visual areas that have been expanded in order to do this. So these are some of the kind of critical traits. And again, we're going to look at some casts that illustrate this and talk a little bit more about some of the adaptive advantages that these have when we look at specific primates and when we look at the casts in class this week. So this table does an excellent job, and this is directly from your text, showing, showing how some of these characteristics that we have are ancestral characteristics. So the fact that we have 5 digits on our hands and feet come to us because we share this with other mammals, right? We have a clavicle or a collarbone that allows for flexibility in our shoulders, and we're going to talk about locomotory patterns in class on Friday that will also allow us to examine this a little bit more, and as well as our ability to rotate our forearm also allows us to move in certain ways that is, again, derived from our ancestral traits and characteristics. However, some things that we have that are not unique to us, again, as being a member of the animal kingdom, but are unique to us as primates, are these kind of evolutionary trends, including some of these prehensile features that we have. So not only do we have, prehensile hands and feet, we have these opposable thumbs and toes, although we'll talk about how ours are less opposable toes than in other primates have, that allow for precision and power grip, allow us to support us not only in terms of locomotion, but also our subsistence activities, but also childcare, allows for freeing of the hands and locomotory behaviors. Anyways, we're going to look at this week. We have nails instead of claws. We have very sensitive tactile pads on our hands and feet, again, that allow us to navigate not only different environments and risk, or assess things like safety and risk, but also allow us to identify differences in things like temperature, which can also impact the safety of our environment or our perception of safety of the environment as well. I've already mentioned how we have a decreased reliance on smell, a greater reliance on vision. This has resulted in a reduction of our snout. We'll talk about this from an evolutionary perspective. We have very kind of flat vertical faces, particularly us as humans. We have a reduced number of teeth, and we also have greater generalization of our dentition as well. So one of the things we're going to see is that non-human living primates, many do have specialized dentition based on their diet. So frugivores versus insectivores versus omnivores versus veggievores, right? All eat different kinds of food, so they'll have teeth that are special for this. By the time we get to humans, so we have very generalized teeth that allow us to eat a wide variety of resources. We also have, again, these kind of big brains relative to our body size. We have these special, not special, but these developed lobes that are focused on things like vision. But what the kind of payoff for that is that it means that many of our infants have to be born prematurely. So we're not born as adults, right? And so we have a prolonged period of infant dependency. So we'll talk about this a little bit more. And part of this means that we also have a greater dependency on learned behaviors, right? So not only are we born needing parents or members of our social group to help raise us and usher us into adulthood, but they're not only providing us with the necessities of life in terms of food and resources, but also are teaching us the critical skills that we need in order to survive as well. Okay, so what I'm capturing here is the form of primate classification, cladistic classification. That is, although in this image it refers to as alternative primate classification, it is the one that is widely used today. So just looking at time, I'm going to post another short video where I'll go over these different types and talk about the distinctions between the groups. And then there'll be a subsequent follow-up video as well, where we will look at primate evolution, which we'll also talk about in lecture this week. Okay.